Meanwhile, world leaders have responded with mixed reactions to the U.S. action, which involved a large-scale strike on Venezuela on Saturday, where Maduro and his wife were captured by U.S. forces and removed from the country. In an initial response, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said his government would shed no tears for the end of Maduro's regime. Neighboring Latin America countries condemned the action, as did Venezuela's long-term allies, Russia and China. China said it was deeply shocked and strongly condemns the use of force against a sovereign nation, a sovereign country, and its president. Russia accused the U.S. of committing an act of armed aggression, while Iran called the strike a flagrant violation of the country's national sovereignty. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in Brazil says the action crossed an unacceptable line, adding attacking countries in flagrant violation of international law is the first step toward a world of violence, chaos, and instability. Joining us now on the news to further unwrap this is Professor from the University of Manchester, Mukesh Kapila. He joins from Geneva, and a global analyst, Yemi Fajemisin. He joins from Glasgow, UK. Professor Thomashausen, international affairs analyst and lawyer. He joins from Gauteng. Gentlemen, you're welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. It's good to have all of you here, but I'll start with Professor Mukesh. Professor, if you don't mind, in your opinion, on what legal grounds do you think Venezuela's Supreme Court transferred presidential powers to the Vice President Delcy Rodríguez after Nicolás Maduro was taken in custody? Professor Mukesh?
Usual here.
Yes.
In any country, the Supreme Court is an arbiter of who holds the presidency when there's a dispute about it, either in parliament or for other reasons. So as in other countries, the Supreme Court has confirmed that the previous vice president is now the president. So I think that's pretty okay, pretty normal, pretty as per the usual legal conventions in most countries.
Okay, then. Yemi, I hope we have Yemi with us. I didn't test your audio from before, but I'd like to know, in your opinion, why did the court stop short of declaring President Maduro permanently absent then? And also, what does that mean for the possibility of new elections?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I agree with Professor Mukesh there. It's a pretty much legal standard framework across many countries where if a president is being imposed or even if a president is incapacitated, the vice president takes charge in this case. The only twist to this case is we don't know if any new elections or any plan regarding new election. We heard yesterday when President Trump said he wanted the Ms. Rodriguez to work with them, and she came out to say that's not going to happen. And Trump is saying she has no choice. So that's a very big statement, and it's vague. So we don't know yet if an election is going to take place. Is she going to be coerced into working with the U.S. authorities? Is the U.S. authorities going to be working with the opposition, which Trump again is declined to saying he doesn't think that will happen. So we can only hope in coming weeks, in coming days, we have more clarity as to if any election is going to hold, if it's going to be involving the opposition, and what is it going to look like when the US say they're going to be running Venezuela. So there's a lot of ifs as it stands now. So hopefully the coming weeks and coming months we shed more clarity.
Yeah. Well, we're already looking at internal politics inside of Venezuela. I think we should also first off maybe start from looking at how unusual this situation is. So I'm going to, Professor Thomashausen, I don't know what geopolitics this tells for the rest of the world. But first of all, let's ask how unusual it is for a sitting president to be captured by foreign forces, another president, and what this means for international law generally.
Good morning. I'm not in South Africa. I'm in a snowed under Hamburg in a hotel room.
Okay.
So that's why the background is strange. On the issue, I think effectiveness of law is part of law. Law that is just a mere pronouncement, like that Supreme Court decision in Venezuela, is not effective, so it is actually nothing. The effectiveness is also called the normative effect of a factual circumstance. And what we've seen here has happened before in Nicaragua, when President Noriega was also kidnapped by the US to stand trial in America on crimes which America deems to be able to try regardless where they happened. And the precedent for this, of course, are the Nuremberg trials, where German leaders were tried for things that they had done in Germany before essentially an American court. So now we see a new reality where the United Nations is no longer effective. What is effective is the silent consensus of the 5 big leaders in this world, which is the American President Trump, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, the Russian President Putin, the Indian Prime Minister Modi, and maybe the Saudi Arabian leader Bin Salman. Those 5 make the new world order and the new laws. And those laws will be different from now on.
Professor Thomashausen, let's talk more about this. You mentioned it, 5 top big leaders. There's also plenty of talk about the reason why the president, that's President Trump, actually invaded. And you used the word kidnapped. I'm going to use that loosely. However, is this about what we were told by Truth Social? Is this about drugs? Is it true? Or do you think that there might be some truth in what's been said about the president being a part of a drug cartel? Or is this about oil?
Well, it is about so many things that that cause enough friction for people to take a very drastic action. If we imagine for a moment that in 1941, Adolf Hitler had been captured in this way, kidnapped and taken to an impartial court, the whole world would have cheered. I think in the case of Venezuela, we forget the massive human rights abuses over the last decade and a bit longer, ever since the reign of Hugo Chavez. There are terrible political prisons in Venezuela, up to 8 floors underground, where people are tortured to death, thousands. So the millions of Venezuelans in exile, they will be celebrating. They will say, finally, another absolutely evil bunch of oppressors led by one dictator have been removed. And this is a reality. We cannot just stick to old-fashioned concepts of sovereignty, of inviolability of a borderline drawn on some map to disguise the horrors that are happening within those territories. Russia would claim the same thing and say, we intervened in the Ukraine because of the massive human rights abuses against the Russian minority in the East. So sticking to the mere formalities that we've inherited from an international law that's over 100 years old, it will not change the reality. The reality is that there are adjustments taking place. Venezuela will be different from now on. And whether United States have really thought that much about oil, oil is a world commodity. You buy it at a daily price. And it doesn't really matter whether it's oil from Venezuela or from Nigeria or from the Middle East.
Okay.
You can buy as much as you like.
Just a second, Professor. Just a second, Professor. Let me go to the other professor here, Professor Mukesh in the building. Professor Mukesh, you've heard what Professor Thomashausen has just said. Now, I'm wondering whether it is so. Are Venezuelans absolutely happy that 26 years of rule by Maduro is gone? Is this really about oppression? What do you have to say about most of his submission?
I think I agree with my colleague here. I think most Venezuelans are very happy, at least as measured by the reporting and the evidence. And quite honestly, 8 million Venezuelans left the country, and that's a vote against the Maduro regime. So I think, and I totally agree, that the international order, which allowed dictators like this to oppress their people for decades, deserves to be broken. So who cares about international order when people suffered such huge human rights abuses in Venezuela, and the same international order afflicts equivalent horrors on other peoples in many other countries around the world. So I, for one, cheer what has happened, and I think it's time to invent a new international order where people's rights, including the human rights, are the center of it, not state sovereignty.
Okay. Professor Mukesh, I keep going back to oil for a reason, but I'll reserve that question for Femi in just a bit. Why was there, Professor Mukesh, this is for you still, why was there a lack of consensus with other world leaders then? We've seen other world leaders condemn what has just happened. We also note that President Trump in the past has condemned the UN and said they've done nothing. But here he is now standing in as a savior. Now,
well, I think...
Go ahead, please.
No, I mean, I think on that point, who cares what the other world leaders think when they themselves have vested interests? So in that sense, many of these world leaders are probably saying something else in private to Trump and cheering him along, and on the other hand, saying the pious things in public. Who really cares? And who really cares what the Secretary to the United Nations, and note what I said, not the Secretary General. He's no longer the Secretary General. He's only a secretary to a moribund Security Council. What he says, the UN is completely incapable. In fact, more than that, through its so-called stewardship of a broken international order, it has allowed oppression to rule in many, many other parts of the world and stopped interventions which would make the lives of people better. So I think, quite honestly, it is irrelevant what Russia and China and many other countries say. They've got their own problems, and in fact, some of them will cheer this as for the wrong reasons, and that is that it allows them the flexibility to undertake their own projects of aggression. And then, of course, because there's no morality left, who are we to condemn if China takes over Taiwan or Russia takes over Ukraine? Now, that's the state of the world, and that's what we should be debating in terms of the new international order, not about trying to lament a past order whose bones and ashes we should be actually burying. Now, coming to your oil question, which I think you've been trying to raise.
I was going to reserve that for Yemi. I will still come back to you on it, but I want to follow a train here where I want Yemi to actually give us this answer. So, Yemi, if you note, the President, Trump, had from earlier always told that the issue was because of drugs being shipped into America illegally. He went on to destroy a couple boats, over a dozen of them, and these were all on drug charges or drug sentiments around drugs. However, we saw that ships were deployed even before the attack in Caracas. Now, I'm wondering what that tells you. And these are oil ships. There's also been talks about taking over or at least managing the oil sector there in Venezuela. But what does that tell you, Yemi?
Let me start by saying I agree to a high degree to say Maduro's regime has been a repressive one. It's been a brutal regime. It's been detaining critics and all. Everybody agrees to that to an extent. But in terms of international law, I'll go back to the oil in a second. Yeah, it's a gross violation of international law. And almost everybody agrees with that. The impact here we're going to be seeing in the long run is going to be a case of grotesque hypocrisy and grotesque double standards. So we're going to be seeing regional superpower like Russia can wake up tomorrow to say they want to invade another European country. As we know, Vladimir Putin is not interested in material things. He just want to recreate the Soviet empire at the back of it. So we got that dynamic there. China being a superpower can wake up to say they want to take Taiwan as well. And it's on one hand, it's okay to say what Trump has done is good because Maduro has been a repressive regime. However, as ugly as he is, Trump has been brazen to say American oil companies are going to go in and make a lot of money. It's been very clear that this is nothing about narcotics. It's all about oil. If you follow the money, who's going to gain here? American oil companies are going to make a fortune. American aircraft maker like Boeing, they're going to make a fortune. In the long run, the money is going to trickle down to American politicians in form of donors into political parties. That's what we're going to be seeing in future. So I think if Trump was sincere in all of this, it's going to allow the opposition to play a part. But he doesn't want to allow that. Why? Because the opposition is a woman. We all know Trump has got a terrible record for women. And also, Miss Machado won the Peace Nobel Prize, which Trump was hoping to win. So there's a lot of dynamics going on here, saying that getting rid of Maduro is a good thing. However, I would say it's a more good thing if the opposition is allowed to be involved. But he doesn't want that because it doesn't suit his interest. So we need to be dissecting these things and to be clear about the dynamics here.
I'm also wondering, we're going to go on a break now, gentlemen, but before we go on that break, I'm keeping you guys, don't go anywhere, but before we go on that break, I wanted to ask exactly what the difference is between the instance we see now in Venezuela and the instance we saw in Iran was, or in Libya. But when we come back from the break, gentlemen, do stay with us. We'll be back to continue this conversation. Welcome back. It's still the 12 o'clock bulletin for a Sunday here, and we are still talking about the instance that has just happened over the weekend with President Donald Trump, as he has put out on Truth Social and has been confirmed the capture of Venezuelan President Maduro and his wife, and who are currently in New York. We have discussing this conversation with us Professor Mukesh Kapila, and also we have Professor Thomashausen, and also joining us is Mr. Yemi Fajemisin. Gentlemen, thank you very much for still remaining. Yemi, before we left, we were talking about, I think you were mentioning, you were telling me about the oil instance and how, no, I was actually telling that there seems to be very big resemblance between what's happening right now with Venezuela and whatever happened in Libya and Iraq from the early 2000s. Would you agree that these purported images of happy Venezuelans might still spell doom for the country? Because we have a very interesting situation where the Supreme Court is telling that they are going to manage transition. They have also directed the Vice President Delcy Rodríguez to take charge of governance. And here Trump is telling that he will help put a structure in place. These are two conflicting narratives now. So Yemi, you go first and tell us what you think about what's going to happen hence.
Well, Mr. Trump has said Mr. Rodriguez doesn't have a choice. So what that means is subject to different interpretations. So to me, it means the U.S. is determined to run the country with or without the vice president consent or approval, even if they have to find a collaborator. Because if you go back to the World War II, for example, when Hitler kind of took France in 1940, so what happened then was they had to find a collaborator. The collaborator was, in this case, was a Frenchman named Pierre Laval, which he kind of collaborated with the Nazi regime to deliver wherever they wanted. If this one sounded a bit extreme, but that's probably going to be the same template. So if the vice president is saying she's not going to work with them, the Trump administration will probably have to find a collaborator to do their bidding. That is likely going to happen. Regarding to your what you alluded to with Libya and it's looking like it's in Iraq, that's one of the complexity in this case. So you're going to be asking yourself questions. How are you going to get Iran, for example, to abandon their nuclear ambition, saying these things? How are you going to diplomatically encourage North Korea in the Korean Peninsula to die down tensions when it comes to testing missiles and nuclear capable warheads? So these are the kind of dynamics you're going to be seeing. Libya gave up their nuclear arsenal under Gaddafi many years ago. So but all these countries like Iran, for example, are going to be thinking maybe it's not a good idea to abandon our nuclear ambition. So these are the kind of, when we say a new world order, I think we need to recognize some of these threats, especially around the Middle East. Middle East is very flammable. There's a lot going on there. So these are the kind of cocktail of complexities that I think should be recognized.
Professor Thomashausen, let me come to you now. Let me ask about the similarities. In the past, we saw in Libya that the authorities there who invaded said they were going to help out with the transitional government. They put that in place, but that broke apart. Same thing happened in Iraq. Now we see the same rhetoric here saying that we're going to help with transition. We're going to help with especially the oil sector, with ships being deployed and all. So we see celebrating Venezuelans, but are we sure that this is to the benefit of Venezuela itself, or might there be other, interests? Professor Thomashausen.
Well, I think the first important aspect is that Russia had placed a nuclear submarine, one of the most deadliest weapon systems existing in this world, right in Venezuelan waters. And what did Russia not do? Russia didn't issue an ultimatum to America and say, get out of Venezuela, return President Maduro, else we put, for instance, a couple of big American cities into ashes. It's only a few presses of a button and Miami or Los Angeles or San Francisco cease to exist. This did not happen. There is a tacit consensus. China, Russia, and Iran may have protested, but they did not do anything. They did not actually issue a threat. So there seems to be what I call the silent consensus of the 5 biggest leaders in this world, that it is better to end the nightmare of the Maduro regime. Then the next issue is, can we actually compare Venezuela to Libya? Libya was a very deeply divided society, especially along religious lines. In Venezuela, there may not be such a division, and the risk of a civil war breaking out in Venezuela may not exist. In that case, there will be a transitional government, a caretaker government, possibly under some American authority, as it happened in Germany after the war, after the surrender of Germany. And then there will be a handover, elections, new constitution, return to a new normality. Let us hope that this is the case. And in that instance, the whole operation will go into history as a successful humanitarian intervention.
All right, Professor, thank you. Professor Mukesh, let's talk about framing. Framing has become a weapon lately. What you say and when you put it out, well, that determines whether people would acquiesce to your narrative. And we've seen this many times. We've seen it here in Nigeria, where the framing has become a religious genocide. We saw that in South Africa, war against white farmers. A white farmers' genocide was what it was. We are seeing that in Venezuela. In the beginning, it was about drug ships coming into America. Now, we talk about human rights violations in Venezuela and how that should actually be the topic. But why was the framing about drugs? And why does it seem to be changing as the narrative continues? Professor Mukesh.
Well, it depends. The framing message depends on the audience being reached. So undoubtedly, the Trump administration has done its research and calculations that for this to be sold to the American people and American Congress, it has to be framed in the light of a security threat to the United States, posed by drugs, posed by illegal migration, and so on. Now, the framing for the rest of the world depends on where you happen to be sitting there. For the rest of the world, if you are sitting in Europe, the human rights angle and the humanitarian angle will be the most important one. If, on the other hand, you're sitting in an authoritarian regime like Russia or China or in Africa, it'll be a message that you don't mess with the United States, because the United States will not tolerate anyone who plays around with them. So there is not one framing. There are a number of different framings depending on who is at the receiving end of it. And I think this is quite skillful, the way these multiple framings are being done.
All right. So, well, gentlemen, I'd like to ask a general question here. Let's take a look at China. China has condemned this. And not just them, a couple of other countries around the world as well have also come out to condemn the action by the United States government. I think alongside criticism from France as well, the concerns from the United Nations. But what international backlash is America looking at currently? Yemi, let's start with you, and if you could keep it moderate so we can go around.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be seeing any backlash from the European Union, for example. Have they been issuing statements, diplomatic statements to say they recognize international law has been broken? They want to see a diplomatic resolution. I'll give you an example. A few months ago in 2025, we have the Secretary General of NATO in the White House calling Trump daddy. So that tells you a lot. To me, that's a capitulation from the European Union. The European Union used to be global thinking, but now they've retracted. They only bother so much about things affecting them directly, like the war in Ukraine. So in terms of the global strategic worldview, I don't think the European Union is that interested. So in these circumstances, I don't think they will do any pressure or put any pressure on Trump successfully to diffuse what is going on. So to me, it's a bit of capitulation from them. From China has issued strong words as well, but I don't think China can do much. China hasn't got the military. Only got 2 bases outside the United States. The US have over 800 bases of military bases across the world.
All right.
So there's nothing that's going to come out of it, sadly.
All right. Professor Mukesh, what about you?
Well, I don't think there'll be a backlash as such, but what we are going to see is sort of collateral implications on how other conflicts and tensions are mediated. Let's not forget that there is a massive war going on, a civil war going on, for example, in Sudan, with the interventions of many of America's friends. Let's not forget that we've got tensions in the Pacific Ocean. And of course, there is in Europe, we have the shadow of the Ukraine war over everything else. So what's going to happen is a recalibration of both tactics and strategies in relation to these tensions and conflicts. But this is not going to be immediate. It's going to take time. It's going to take calculations. And the other collateral implication of this is we're going to see a massive remilitarization, of which is happening anyway, but it's going to be accelerated. And not just among the big NATO powers who want to reduce dependence on the United States or countervailing militarization in Russia and China. I'm talking about the smaller powers who also want to remove dependence on bigger powers or medium-sized powers. So we're going to see a world which is more militarized, which is more reliant on itself, more individual countries, and which is going to build all sorts of multiple alliances and overlapping alliances to safeguard national interests. That's what the implications of this are. So in that sense, if you like, it'll have a strategic impact, but that only time will tell.
Okay. Professor Thomashausen, your turn, but this time could you also impute the interactions between allied nations on each side of the divide as we are seeing these fractures happen geopolitically?
Well, we have seen the move from a bipolar world to superpowers to a multipolar world. Several superpowers, and I already named the 5 big ones: America, China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia. And the alliances will shift, and they will no longer be stable alliances. The risk is that we are approaching a international situation similar to that before World War I, where alliances can change on a monthly basis, and it becomes very difficult to predict where the next crisis point is going to develop and how it is going to unfold. This is the disadvantage of a multipolar world. The little ones, the weak states, the failing states will simply have no say in these developments.
I want to say thank you very much, Professor Mukesh Kapila, Professor Thomashausen, Andre, and of course, Yemi Fajemisin. We're working on that professorship, aren't we, Yemi? I hope. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining on this conversation.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
You're welcome.